Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, believed in them so fiercely that when they walked away, it didn't just hurt, it broke something inside you? Maybe it was a friend who swore they'd always have your back, a partner who promised to love you forever, a colleague who called you family. And then, one day, without warning or explanation, they were gone. Just like that. The loyalty they spoke of vanished, and in its place, silence, confusion, pain. If you've been there, this video is for you. Today, we're going to explore a truth that may challenge everything you've believed about human connection. A truth that's uncomfortable, yes, but freeing. A truth that Italian political philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli whispered to the world centuries ago, one that society has spent generations avoiding. Loyalty is not absolute. It's not eternal, and it's not what we want to believe it is. In this video, we're diving deep into what loyalty truly means, not the storybook version, but the real-world, blood and bone version. We'll walk through betrayal and disillusionment, but we won't stop there. We'll rise into clarity, self-awareness, and strength. Because when you understand the nature of loyalty, you stop expecting miracles from people and start building relationships that actually last. Machiavelli wrote, "It is far safer to be feared than loved." But what if he wasn't advocating fear at all? What if he was advocating structure, systems, consequences? What if he was teaching us how to live wisely in a world where everyone has a breaking point? We'll talk about the difference between the performance of loyalty and the reality beneath it. Why people often stay not because of their hearts, but because it still serves them to stay. Why the ones who swear eternal loyalty may actually be the ones most likely to walk away. And why those who truly understand the fragility of loyalty are often the ones who protect it the best. You'll learn why loyalty doesn't come from vows, but from mutual benefit. Why it lasts not because people are noble, but because the relationship is designed to withstand stress. And why, in the end, you don't need a world full of loyalty, you need a world full of honesty. This is not just a video. It's a journey into self-awareness. It's about learning how to stop being surprised by betrayal, how to build better bonds, and how to walk through life with eyes open, not hardened, not cynical, but clear. It's about discovering that emotional maturity isn't about guarding your heart, it's about understanding the mechanics of connection. So before we get started, take a moment right now, hit that like button if you've ever had to question someone's loyalty. Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to dive deeper into human behavior, relationships, and philosophical wisdom. And if this message resonates with you and you'd like to support what we do, you can click that super thanks button or share this video with someone who's been through the same pain. Because chances are, they've been looking for this truth too. Let's begin. We all know the feeling. You trust someone deeply. Maybe it's a best friend you've shared everything with, or a colleague you've backed through thick and thin, a partner you believed in. And then, in a moment that seems to come out of nowhere, they turn their back on you. It feels like the ground beneath your feet crumbles. You replay the memories, try to find the warning signs. Tell yourself it couldn't have been real, but it was. They were there. They said the words, made the promises. And then, just like that, they were gone. One of the most famous betrayals in history is the story of Julius Caesar and Brutus. Caesar, a powerful Roman leader, trusted Brutus not just politically, but personally like family. Yet Brutus was one of the main conspirators who assassinated him. Et tu, Brute? Those chilling words have echoed through history, not because of the politics, but because of the heartbreak. The pain of being stabbed not by an enemy, but by a loyal friend. From an early age, we're taught that loyalty is a virtue, one of the highest. Be loyal to your country. Stand by your family. Stay true to your friends. It's in the fairy tales we read, the slogans in schools, the codes of honor in every culture. Loyalty is presented as the golden thread that holds relationships, communities, even nations together. It's the mark of a good person. Breaking loyalty? That's betrayal, and betrayal is practically the original sin in human relationships. But what if the ideal of loyalty we grew up with isn't the whole truth? What if beneath all the speeches, symbols, and ceremonies, loyalty isn't the virtue we imagine, but a beautifully packaged illusion? Let's start with this simple question. If loyalty is such a core human value, why is it so often broken? You don't have to look far for examples. A promising employee who's praised for years suddenly gets a better offer and walks away from the company. A celebrity who once claimed undying love for a brand or partner makes a sharp turn when their image is on the line. Friends who disappear during your lowest points. Politicians who pivot on their core beliefs the moment the polls drop. If loyalty were an unshakable moral principle, these stories wouldn't be so common. But they are. Not only are they common, they're expected. We've come to call it the way things are. Still, we cling to the ideal of loyalty. Why? Because loyalty feels safe. It gives structure to our emotional world. When we believe someone is loyal, we feel secure in their presence. We stop watching our backs. Loyalty acts as emotional insurance. We believe that even if things go wrong, even if we mess up, there's someone who will still stand by us. And that belief allows us to build, to trust, to love. It's deeply comforting. Religion plays a massive role here. In most major religions, loyalty isn't just encouraged, it's sacred. Loyalty to God, to Scripture, to your spiritual community. In Christianity, betrayal is the ultimate failure. Think of Judas. In Islam, loyalty to faith and the Ummah community is a central pillar. In Buddhism, loyalty takes the form of devotion to Dharma and teacher. The more unshakable your loyalty, the more virtuous you are believed to be. Education reinforces the same narrative. School systems around the world teach children to be loyal to their country, their culture, their national identity. Even classroom slogans: be loyal to your team, stick with your group, never give up on your schoolmates, imprint the idea that loyalty is the currency of goodness. Family traditions, too, often center on loyalty. Blood is thicker than water. Always stand by your family. In many Asian cultures, particularly, loyalty to elders, to lineage, to ancestors is foundational. To break away is to be seen as shameful. Loyalty, in this context, isn't just a value, it's a duty. But here's the thing. Duty, tradition, belief, none of these guarantee action. Just because we're told to be loyal doesn't mean we will be. Just because someone promises loyalty doesn't mean they'll uphold it. And even when we truly mean it in one moment, circumstances change and our priorities change with them. We love the idea of loyalty more than we actually live it. Loyalty is like a story we keep telling ourselves to make sense of the unpredictable. We imagine a world where loyalty is firm and permanent, so we don't have to constantly question the ground we stand on. But that imagination can lead to dangerous expectations. It convinces us that loyalty is an identity, either you're a loyal person or you're not. When in reality, loyalty is a choice made again and again, based on the conditions around us. Think of a workplace scenario. An employee works at a company for 10 years. They've been through highs and lows. They've sacrificed weekends, worked overtime, supported their team. But one day, the company is acquired, and they're laid off. No warning, no thank you, just a severance package. Were they not loyal enough? Or was their loyalty simply irrelevant when profit came into play? Flip it around. A company may expect its employees to stay loyal through downsizing, low pay, or instability, but doesn't hesitate to cut staff when numbers dip. So who's betraying whom? In romantic relationships, loyalty is often idealized to the point of fantasy. I'll always be here. Nothing can break us. But love isn't a contract, it's a feeling, and feelings shift. People change, needs evolve, and when loyalty is tested through temptation, trauma, distance, it either adapts or it fractures. Sometimes it doesn't survive. That doesn't always mean the person was malicious. It might just mean the conditions changed more than the commitment could handle. The myth of loyalty seduces us because it offers permanence in a world that's anything but permanent. It tells us that if we just commit hard enough, believe deeply enough, love unconditionally enough, then others will do the same. But they won't always. Because like us, they're human. And humans are driven by needs: emotional, financial, existential. When those needs aren't met, loyalty bends. Sometimes it breaks, and when it breaks, it hurts deeply. Because we don't just lose a relationship, we lose the story we believed about ourselves and that person. We feel foolish for trusting. But maybe it's not foolishness. Maybe it's just misplaced expectation. The philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli once said, "Men are quick to promise loyalty, but slow to keep it." That idea, as uncomfortable as it is, captures a truth we often avoid. Loyalty isn't stable. It's situational. And maybe, just maybe, accepting that truth doesn't make us colder, it makes us wiser. Here's the shift. Instead of demanding blind loyalty from others, we can look for aligned values, mutual respect, and shared goals. Instead of promising eternal loyalty, we can promise honesty, transparency, and the willingness to revisit our commitment when needed. Loyalty shouldn't be about clinging to the past. It should be about choosing the present again and again. People will walk away. Sometimes they'll walk towards something better. Sometimes they'll just walk out. That doesn't mean loyalty doesn't exist. It means it's alive, and like anything alive, it breathes, it reacts, it responds. It adapts. It ends. If we can see loyalty not as a rigid virtue, but as a dynamic force, something that grows or shrinks, depending on the environment, we can protect ourselves better. We can build deeper relationships rooted in reality, not fantasy. We can forgive more gracefully when loyalty fails. And we can become people who choose loyalty not because we're expected to, but because it still makes sense. In the end, maybe loyalty isn't a lie. Maybe the lie is that it's unconditional. Because the truth is, loyalty, like love, like trust, must be nourished. It can't be demanded. And once we stop idealizing it, we can finally start understanding it. Niccolò Machiavelli was born in 1469 in Florence, Italy, a city that at the time was not only a cradle of the Renaissance, but also a hotbed of political chaos, backstabbing, and shifting allegiances. It was a world where power changed hands swiftly and violently, where today's allies could become tomorrow's enemies, and where idealism often fell to the cold calculations of survival. In such a setting, Machiavelli observed firsthand how human nature collided with power, how principles bent when confronted with pressure, and how loyalty was less a moral stance and more a convenient tool. He lived through the fall and rise of the Medici family, a time when Florence was under constant threat from foreign invasions, internal conspiracies, and the ambitions of rival families. Machiavelli himself served as a senior official in the Florentine Republic for about 14 years, where he was responsible for diplomatic missions and military organization. These experiences gave him a front-row seat to the raw theater of politics, not the sanitized version we often read about in textbooks, but the gritty, manipulative, and frequently violent version that played out behind closed doors. After the Medici regained control of Florence in 1512, Machiavelli was imprisoned, tortured, and eventually exiled. It was during this period of personal disgrace that he wrote The Prince, the book that would immortalize his name and cement his reputation as either a political genius or a ruthless cynic, depending on who you ask. What's often misunderstood, however, is that Machiavelli didn't write The Prince as a guidebook for evil. He wrote it as a brutally honest reflection of what he saw in the world around him. He wasn't prescribing cruelty. He was diagnosing reality. One of the most quoted lines from The Prince is, "It is far safer to be feared than loved." At first glance, this sounds like the mantra of a tyrant. But dig deeper, and what Machiavelli was really saying is that love is fleeting, emotions change. People shift their feelings, but fear, when managed properly, creates more stable control. He wasn't advocating for sadism or terror. He was arguing that people are more consistent in avoiding pain than they are in maintaining affection. A ruler who depends solely on being loved may find that love abandoned at the first sign of hardship. But a ruler who is wisely feared, meaning respected and not hated, is less likely to be betrayed when things get tough. This insight isn't just about political leaders. It's about human nature at large. Machiavelli believed that people are fundamentally self-interested. They will act in accordance with their own survival, comfort, and benefit. Loyalty, then, is not an inherent virtue, it's a byproduct of aligned interests. When someone's interests match yours, they appear loyal. When they diverge, that so-called loyalty evaporates. This is a sobering realization. We like to think of loyalty as something pure, something that stands the test of time and hardship. But Machiavelli's point is that this kind of loyalty rarely exists. Instead, what we often perceive as loyalty is simply an alignment of goals, incentives, and fears. As soon as those conditions shift, so does the behavior. And in politics, this kind of shift can happen overnight. Consider modern examples. Political endorsements vanish when a candidate drops in the polls. CEOs are ousted by their own boards when profits decline. Countries abandon long-standing alliances when national interests evolve. We call it betrayal. Machiavelli would call it reality. He saw this over and over again in Florence. When the Medici fell, their supporters swiftly pledged allegiance to the new republic. When the Medici returned, many of those same people welcomed them back with open arms. This wasn't because Florentines were uniquely disloyal. It was because their loyalties were always conditional. People adjusted their allegiances based on which side would give them the greatest advantage, or at least protect them from harm. This is why Machiavelli's work was so shocking, not because it was evil, but because it exposed the polite fictions that societies depend on. We like to believe people are loyal because they are good. Machiavelli showed us that people appear loyal because it serves them to do so. And this doesn't just apply to the 16th century. Take the workplace. A company might talk about its family culture, emphasizing loyalty, dedication, and values. But in reality, if an employee gets a better offer, or feels unappreciated, or sees the company struggling, they may leave. Likewise, if a company needs to downsize, even its most loyal employees may find themselves out of a job. Is that betrayal, or is it just business? Machiavelli would say it's neither. It's human nature, operating exactly as expected. In relationships, we often hear phrases like ride or die, through thick and thin, till death do us part. These romanticized notions of loyalty make for beautiful vows, but they rarely account for the full complexity of life. People change, priorities shift, new temptations, pressures, and opportunities arise. When loyalty is tested, whether by distance, infidelity, illness, or financial stress, those who once seemed inseparable can drift apart. Again, it's not always due to moral failure. Sometimes, it's just that the underlying alignment that once held them together no longer exists. Machiavelli didn't view this as cynical. He saw it as liberating. Once you understand that loyalty is conditional, you stop expecting it to be absolute. You begin to assess relationships more realistically. Instead of relying on promises and proclamations, you start looking at interests and incentives. What keeps this person loyal? What might change that? What happens if their needs shift or if someone offers them something better? These questions aren't signs of paranoia, they're signs of maturity. They help us build relationships that are based on mutual understanding rather than blind faith. And in some cases, recognizing the limits of loyalty can help us strengthen it. Because when we understand what motivates people, we can align our interests more intentionally. We can create bonds that are not just emotional, but strategic. Machiavelli was not without hope. He believed that virtuous behavior could exist, but only when it was supported by practical incentives. He admired leaders who were smart, decisive, and strategic. He believed in strength, not cruelty, in foresight, not manipulation for its own sake. But most of all, he believed in dealing with the world as it is, not as we wish it were. That, to him, was the ultimate form of wisdom. His critics have often painted him as immoral. But in truth, he was amoral. He stepped outside the moral frame to understand how power actually functions. He wasn't trying to corrupt people. He was trying to prepare them for a world where pretending everyone is noble can be a dangerous mistake. There's a quote attributed to Machiavelli, though it may be apocryphal, that says, "I'm not interested in the way things ought to be. I'm interested in the way things are." That's the essence of his legacy. He dared to say what others only suspected, that behind every banner of loyalty is a set of calculations. That behind every promise is a potential condition. That what we call betrayal is often just a shift in priorities. Understanding this doesn't mean we stop believing in loyalty. It means we believe in it more intelligently. We stop mistaking it for something eternal and start seeing it as something earned, maintained, and subject to the forces of change. We stop being surprised when people leave and start focusing on why they might want to stay. In that sense, Machiavelli didn't destroy the idea of loyalty. He just peeled back the layers to show what holds it together. And by doing so, he gave us a powerful tool not to manipulate others, but to understand them. To expect people to act in their own interest is not to be cynical. It is to be prepared. And when you are prepared, you can lead, you can love, and you can trust not blindly, but wisely. That is the terrifying beauty of Machiavelli's truth. Loyalty is often portrayed as something pure and noble, an unwavering commitment that stands firm regardless of the circumstances. But in practice, loyalty rarely functions that way. Strip away the romance, and you'll often find that loyalty operates more like a transaction. People remain loyal as long as there's something in it for them. It sounds harsh, even cynical, but the more we look at how loyalty plays out in real life, the more this idea starts to make sense. In the world of business, loyalty is constantly marketed as a virtue. Companies talk about loyal employees and loyal customers, while employees are encouraged to be loyal to their employers. But when financial pressure hits, that loyalty often evaporates. Think of a long-time employee who's dedicated years, sometimes decades, to a company. They've skipped vacations, stayed late, mentored others, and gone above and beyond. But when the company goes through a rough patch or needs to cut costs, that same employee may find themselves laid off with little more than a severance check and a goodbye email. Was their loyalty not enough? Or was it simply no longer valuable? Now flip the perspective. Suppose an employee who has given years of service to a company gets a better offer elsewhere, better pay, better work-life balance, more career growth. If they take the offer, are they disloyal? Or are they simply recognizing that their needs have changed and the transaction no longer benefits them? Loyalty, in these scenarios, is conditional. It lasts as long as the perceived benefits outweigh the alternatives. The moment that changes, the bond weakens. And this pattern isn't limited to the workplace. It plays out in friendships, family, and romantic relationships too. Take friendships, for instance. When someone is successful, financially stable, socially connected, emotionally generous, they often attract a lot of friends. People want to be around them, celebrate with them, learn from them. But when that same person hits a rough patch, loses a job, gets divorced, suffers a health crisis, many of those friends disappear. It's not that they consciously decide to betray their friend. It's that the value they were receiving from the relationship has changed. The emotional reward, the social boost, the financial assistance, all of it is gone. And so is the incentive to stay close. This is why people often say, when I had nothing, I found out who my real friends were. It's not just a cliche, it's a recognition that many friendships are built on unspoken transactions. As long as there's mutual benefit, things run smoothly. But when one side can no longer contribute, the illusion of loyalty fades. What remains, if anything, is the real thing. Romantic relationships follow similar logic, though it's often dressed up in more sentimental language. Couples vow to stay together for better or worse. But those vows are frequently tested when one partner becomes ill, loses their income, or faces personal struggles. Many relationships fall apart under such pressure, not necessarily because of malice or infidelity, but because the terms of the emotional transaction have shifted. The support, affection, and stability that once defined the relationship may no longer be present, and without those elements, loyalty falters. Even family, which is supposed to be the ultimate bastion of loyalty, isn't immune. People often feel deep pain when family members withdraw support during difficult times, especially after years of shared history. But the same transactional logic can apply if helping a relative becomes too costly emotionally, financially, or socially. Even blood ties can fray. The old adage, blood is thicker than water, gets tested and sometimes fails when the personal cost of loyalty becomes too high. What makes this realization difficult is that most people don't want to admit their loyalties are transactional. We like to see ourselves as good, loyal people who stand by others no matter what. Admitting that our commitment depends on what we get in return feels selfish. But it's not about being selfish, it's about being human. Our capacity for loyalty is shaped by our needs, our boundaries, and our values. And when those things are threatened or unmet, our loyalty naturally re-evaluates itself. Think about how we use loyalty points in marketing, literally called loyalty programs. Airlines, coffee shops, online retailers, they all reward repeat customers with points, discounts, or freebies. But if a competitor offers a better deal, customers will switch. Not because they're disloyal, but because the transaction no longer serves them. The irony is that businesses understand this. They don't expect absolute loyalty. They just try to keep the transaction favorable enough to delay defection. Politicians operate in much the same way. Voters are loyal until they feel neglected, lied to, or economically abandoned. Then they switch sides. Political parties regularly rebrand, shift policies, or oust longtime members to keep up with changing voter preferences. Behind the speeches about values and history lies a cold understanding. Loyalty is only as strong as the perceived return on investment. Now, this doesn't mean loyalty is fake or worthless. It means loyalty has layers. There's surface-level loyalty, which is often about appearances, what we say, how we act in public, the image we project. And then there's deeper loyalty, which comes from shared values, long-term investment, and mutual understanding. This deeper form takes time to build and doesn't shift as easily, but it's still influenced by context. Even the most meaningful loyalty needs nourishment. It can't survive indefinitely without care, respect, or reciprocity. So how do we tell the difference between performative loyalty and genuine loyalty? One key indicator is consistency over time, especially during hardship. A friend who celebrates your wins but vanishes in your losses is showing you that their loyalty was conditional from the beginning. A partner who supports you even when you're at your lowest is displaying a loyalty rooted in something deeper than benefit. But even then, it's not necessarily unconditional. That partner may still leave if their needs are continually unmet or if they feel taken for granted. Genuine loyalty is deep, but it's not infinite. It breathes. It responds. The phrase, people don't leave you, they leave the benefits of being with you, hits a nerve because it feels true. Whether in friendships, work, or love, people often withdraw when the value of the connection changes. Sometimes it's financial. Sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it's reputational. Whatever the form, people make decisions based on what a relationship gives them or costs them. This doesn't make them bad. It makes them pragmatic. And expecting people to defy their own interests indefinitely is a setup for disappointment. But this understanding can be empowering too. If loyalty is a transaction, then we can focus on making the transaction meaningful for both sides. In business, this means building a workplace culture where employees feel seen, heard, and supported, not just used. In friendships, it means showing up for people even when they're struggling, not just when they're fun to be around. In relationships, it means investing in your partner's well-being, not assuming love is enough to sustain everything. It also means being honest about your own loyalty. Are you staying in a situation out of habit, fear, or obligation, or because you genuinely see mutual value? Recognizing your reasons helps you make better choices and build healthier bonds. At a societal level, recognizing loyalty as a transaction could help us build more compassionate systems. Rather than shaming people for leaving jobs, relationships, or communities, We could ask what changed in the value exchange. Why did this person feel the need to move on? What needs weren't being met? What could have been done differently? These questions are more constructive than moral judgment. Of course, there are exceptions. Some people do show extraordinary, near unbreakable loyalty, soldiers to their units, activists to their causes, caregivers to their loved ones. These stories inspire us because they push beyond transactional logic. But even in these cases, there's often a deep alignment between the person's identity and the mission. They're not being loyal blindly. They found a purpose that gives them meaning. That, too, is a kind of transaction, though an existential one. The point isn't to strip loyalty of its nobility, but to ground it in reality. Loyalty isn't magical. It's built, it's maintained, it's tested, and when it fails, it's often not because someone was evil, but because the conditions that sustained it changed. The more we understand this, the better we can prepare, protect, and preserve the relationships that truly matter. Loyalty isn't about clinging at all costs. It's about mutual presence, choosing each other again and again, as long as it makes sense for both sides. It's a dance, not a chain. And when we understand that, we stop demanding impossible things from people, and we start appreciating the moments when they stay, not because they have to, but because they want to. Betrayal is one of the most painful experiences a person can endure, not necessarily because of the action itself, but because of what it shatters inside us, our expectations, our sense of safety, our understanding of who someone was. When we feel betrayed, it's not just that someone acted against us. It's that they violated an image we had of them, and of a relationship we thought we shared. This is what makes betrayal so personal, even when it comes from someone who may have had no intention of causing harm. The sting of betrayal is rarely about the facts. It's about the rupture of a belief system we were emotionally invested in. Why do people betray each other? It's easy to say it's because they're bad, selfish, or disloyal. But more often than not, betrayal isn't rooted in evil, it's rooted in shifting interests, conflicting needs, and changing circumstances. When people make decisions that go against our expectations of loyalty, they're often doing so because their priorities have changed. They see a path that better serves their survival, happiness, or a sense of purpose. The problem is not always that they've turned into villains, but that we expected them to remain static when they, like us, are dynamic beings with evolving motivations. In romantic relationships, betrayal often shows up as infidelity, abandonment, or emotional withdrawal. Imagine a couple who starts out deeply in love, devoted to each other, full of plans and promises. Over time, one partner changes, maybe their career takes off and their world expands, or maybe they go through a personal crisis and start questioning everything. The other partner remains the same, expecting that the loyalty they once shared is still intact. But one day, the first partner cheats or walks away. It feels like betrayal, and emotionally, it absolutely is, but from their perspective, it may have felt like a necessary shift, a move toward fulfillment or escape from suffocation. The betrayal wasn't just in the action, it was in the failure to communicate that their internal reality had changed. In friendships, betrayal often emerges in moments of crisis. A friend you thought would stand by you disappears when you lose your job, fall into depression, or face public embarrassment. It's not always because they don't care. Sometimes it's because your struggle makes them uncomfortable. It demands more than they're ready to give. Or perhaps your social value to them has decreased. They no longer benefit from being associated with you. This sounds brutal, but social dynamics often operate in these subtle, transactional ways. What hurts the most is not just that the friend vanished, but that you believe they wouldn't. You believe their loyalty was unconditional, and when reality proved otherwise, it cracked the image you had of them and maybe a friendship itself. In politics, betrayal is routine. Alliances form and break depending on who holds power, who controls resources, and who can offer better deals. A political party that once championed a certain leader may turn on them overnight if polls shift or scandals emerge. Staffers who once echoed every word of the candidate may leak damaging information to the press when it serves their future. The betrayal here is rarely personal. it's strategic. The loyalty was never rooted in shared values. It was rooted in shared opportunity. When that opportunity vanishes, so does the alliance. And yet, we continue to be shocked by political betrayals because we pretend the players are driven by integrity rather than interest. We want to believe they meant it, even when everything about the system tells us otherwise. The pain of betrayal is amplified by our own expectations. We expect loyalty to be a reflection of character, not circumstance. When someone stays by our side, we interpret it as proof of who they are. When they leave, we reinterpret everything in the past through a darker lens. Was it ever real? Did they ever care? Were they just pretending? This retroactive doubt is part of the trauma of betrayal. It doesn't just hurt our relationship with the person, it damages our ability to trust our own judgment. But what if the problem isn't that people are disloyal, but that we misunderstood the nature of loyalty to begin with? What if we built our expectations on a myth that loyalty is fixed, eternal, and unconditional, when in truth, it is flexible, situational, and deeply human? Understanding betrayal through this lens doesn't make it less painful, but it can make it less confusing. Consider this. We rarely feel betrayed by people we expect nothing from. If a stranger lets us down, it's disappointing at worst. But if a best friend, a spouse, or a mentor fails us, it cuts to the bone. Why? Because betrayal requires expectation. It requires belief. And often, it requires idealization. We don't just expect people to be loyal, we expect them to be better than human. To rise above self-interest, to stay even when it costs them. When they don't, it feels like a personal violation when it might just be a human reaction. There's a line that encapsulates this well. They didn't betray you. You misunderstood their incentives. It sounds cold, but it's a call for clarity. It asks us to stop seeing betrayal as a moral crime and start seeing it as a signal, something that points to a misalignment between what we thought the relationship was and what it actually was. Betrayal isn't always about bad people doing bad things. Sometimes it's about people being themselves in ways we didn't expect. That doesn't mean betrayal is excusable. It means it's understandable. And understanding it allows us to respond with wisdom instead of just pain. When we see betrayal as a systemic outcome rather than a personal attack, we gain perspective. We can ask better questions. What assumptions did I make? What signs did I miss? What values did I project onto this person that they may never have shared? This kind of reflection doesn't remove the hurt, but it can prevent the kind of bitterness that calcifies over time. It also helps us set more realistic expectations in future relationships. Instead of demanding absolute loyalty, we can seek mutual understanding. Instead of placing people on pedestals, we can meet them where they are flawed, complex, and evolving. It's worth noting that betrayal can also teach us about ourselves. When we feel betrayed, we often focus on the other person's actions, but rarely do we examine our own role in the dynamic. Do we ignore red flags? Do we assume too much? Did we overinvest without reciprocity? Sometimes, our greatest pain comes not from what others did to us, but from what we allowed ourselves to believe. And while that's a hard truth to face, it's also empowering because it means we can change. We can change how we approach loyalty. We can ask more questions, have deeper conversations, build agreements that are rooted in clarity rather than assumption. We can learn to value the kind of loyalty that comes from active commitment, not passive expectation. And we can learn to offer that kind of loyalty ourselves, not as a performance, but as a choice we keep making as long as the conditions support it. The most dangerous thing about betrayal is not the act itself, it's the disillusionment that follows. It's the moment we realize that the person we trusted was playing a different game than we thought. That moment can break us, or it can wake us up. It can make us bitter, or it can make us wiser. The difference lies in how we choose to interpret the experience. One of the hardest things to accept is that some people will walk away, not because they hate us, but because the relationship no longer serves their growth, comfort, or needs. That doesn't mean we didn't matter to them. It means their life is moving in a direction that no longer includes us. It hurts, but it's not necessarily a reflection of our worth. It's a reflection of change. The flip side of this is just as true. Sometimes we are the ones who walk away. We leave jobs, friendships, or relationships that no longer align with who we are. And when we do, we hope others will understand. We hope they won't see it as betrayal, but as evolution. If we want that grace for ourselves, we have to be willing to extend it to others too. This doesn't mean we shouldn't hold people accountable. Betrayal that involves deception, cruelty, or exploitation still deserves condemnation. But we should separate intentional harm from natural divergence. Not every exit is a knife in the back. Some are just the result of life pulling people in different directions. In the end, betrayal forces us to confront the gap between ideal and reality. It invites us to reassess what loyalty means, what we expect from others, and how we handle disappointment. It shows us where we placed our hope, and whether that hope was grounded or blind. And, perhaps most importantly, it challenges us to love and connect more consciously, to choose relationships that are based not just on history or emotion, but on clarity, mutual benefit, and respect for each other's growth. The pain of betrayal is real, but it doesn't have to define us. It can refine us. It can sharpen our vision. It can teach us to build connections that are stronger, not because they're perfect, but because they are understood. And in that understanding, there's strength not in expecting people to never change, but in learning how to stay steady when they do. Loyalty, when it truly lasts, isn't just about love, honor, or moral values. It's about structure. It's about alignment. It's about what happens when two or more parties not only share goals, but also share something to lose if they break away from each other. Real loyalty doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists within systems legal, emotional, economic that are carefully, often invisibly, designed to bind people together through aligned benefits and significant consequences for leaving. This is the hidden machinery of lasting loyalty, and it's far more practical than poetic. One of the most common assumptions about loyalty is that it emerges from virtue, that people who are loyal are simply better, people more moral, more committed, more selfless. But over time, examples both public and private show us something else. That loyalty often has less to do with character and more to do with context. In marriages that last decades, in businesses that retain employees for generations, in friendships that survive storms, what we usually find is not just deep affection or shared values, but mutual gain and built-in consequences that make departure costly. Let's take marriage as the first and clearest example. People often get married believing that love alone will sustain their bond. And while love is certainly foundational, it's rarely enough. What keeps many couples together for the long haul isn't just love, it's the web of intertwined interests, obligations, and consequences they've developed over time. Think about what marriage entails: shared property, joint finances, children, social identity, legal contracts. All of these elements create a structure that makes it both rewarding to stay and costly to leave. Divorce is emotionally painful, yes, but it's also financially and logistically difficult. And that's by design. The legal structure surrounding marriage is, in many ways, a loyalty-enhancing mechanism. It's meant to add weight to the emotional commitment by embedding it within a framework of real consequences. Without this framework, the for better or worse vow becomes significantly harder to maintain, especially during the worse. The workplace functions in a similar way. A long-term employee might be loyal to a company not because they feel a deep moral obligation, but because they've built their life around that job. They may have retirement benefits, stock options, or a strong sense of identity tied to their role. The employer, in turn, may invest in the employee's training, offer consistent raises, or provide emotional support through a strong company culture. This mutual investment makes loyalty logical. The employee gains from staying, the company gains from keeping them. And even more importantly, both risk losing something if the relationship breaks. If that employee leaves, they may forfeit seniority, stability, or a supportive environment. If the company loses them, it may face disruption, knowledge loss, and recruitment costs. These dynamics aren't accidental, they're structural. Companies that retain talent best are those that build systems of mutual benefit and interdependence. Think of Japanese corporations like Toyota or Panasonic, known for their lifetime employment culture. Employees there often stay for decades, not just because of tradition, but because the organizational design supports loyalty. There's a strong cultural expectation of commitment, yes, but also a deep reciprocal investment from the company. Employees are trained extensively, promoted slowly, and treated with a kind of familial respect. In return, they're expected to be loyal, but that loyalty isn't blind. It's earned through systems that align the goals of the individual with the goals of the institution. Even the military, one of the most loyalty-driven organizations in society, builds that loyalty through mechanisms rather than just inspiration. Soldiers don't remain committed to their units through patriotism alone. They go through shared hardship, intensive bonding experiences, strict hierarchy, and binding contracts. Their loyalty is enhanced by the structure they operate within, the fear of dishonorable discharge, the pride of collective identity, the benefits of rank and pension, and the intense pressure of belonging. Remove those mechanisms, and even the strongest esprit de corps can fade. Now apply this to families. Some families have lasting loyalty because they've built interdependence. They live together, share businesses, raise children as a village. Loyalty in these cases comes not just from blood, but from function. Everyone plays a role that supports the others. If someone leaves or breaks trust, the system suffers and they feel the consequences immediately. But in families where individualism is high and mutual reliance is low, loyalty tends to weaken. If you rarely talk, don't share responsibilities, and can live just as well without each other, then what incentive exists to stay loyal when a conflict arises? The emotional bond alone is often not enough. It needs reinforcement through presence, through shared goals, through responsibility. This is why some parents lose contact with their adult children, not because the love is gone, but because the system that supported loyalty eroded. And conversely, it's why in immigrant families or multi-generational households, loyalty tends to remain strong. Because everyone's survival and success are interconnected. The loyalty isn't just emotional, it's structural. The legal system understands this dynamic deeply. Non compete clauses, prenups. Confidentiality agreements, all of these are designed to secure loyalty not through trust, but through consequence. They're not a sign of distrust, necessarily, they're recognition of human nature. People are more likely to stay committed when the cost of betrayal is high and the reward for staying is clear. This logic extends to social contracts as well. Governments maintain citizen loyalty not simply through patriotism, but through systems that align personal and national interest. People are loyal to countries that protect their rights, offer opportunity, and foster identity. When those benefits are absent, loyalty crumbles no matter how many flags are waved. Think of political revolutions. They occur not when people suddenly become unpatriotic, but when the structure of benefit and consequence collapses. If a government exploits its citizens while offering little in return, loyalty transforms into resentment. The same is true in schools, communities, and even religious institutions. Loyalty thrives where there is shared benefit and visible consequence. A student stays committed to a school when they feel supported, respected, and challenged. A congregant remains loyal to a church when it provides spiritual nourishment, social support, and belonging. But if these benefits erode, and there is no meaningful loss in leaving, then loyalty fades. One of the most dangerous myths about loyalty is that it is purely emotional, that people should just know to stay loyal if they care enough. But loyalty, when reduced to a feeling, becomes unstable. Feelings change, circumstances shift, and without a structure to reinforce loyalty, emotional bonds often break under pressure. That's why real loyalty needs reinforcement. It needs to be tied to mechanisms visible or invisible that reward staying and penalize leaving. This doesn't mean loyalty has to be coercive. In fact, the healthiest forms of structural loyalty are ones that are voluntarily maintained. They feel organic because the systems are built on fairness, transparency, and mutual gain. The best relationships don't trap people, they give them every reason to stay. And when people do stay, they're not staying because they have no choice. They're staying because the design of the relationship supports their well-being. Even in friendships, this logic holds. Friendships that last are often ones where both parties feel consistently valued. Maybe you rely on each other emotionally. Maybe you help each other move houses. Maybe you're always there for big life events. These small acts create a sense of mutual investment. If one friend starts taking without giving, the balance shifts. Over time, loyalty dissolves not out of betrayal, but out of imbalance. We can also see these principles in the realm of brand loyalty. Some people swear by Apple or Nike or Costco, not because of blind devotion, but because these companies have created consistent, beneficial experiences. When a brand delivers on its promise, supports the customer, and maintains a high standard, customers return. But the moment the product fails or the customer feels disrespected, that loyalty weakens. Again, it's structural. There's nothing inherently magical about brand love. It's built and maintained through consistent, aligned experience. What all of this reveals is that loyalty doesn't grow from the heart. It grows from a system. That doesn't mean love, trust, and emotional commitment are irrelevant. They matter immensely. But they thrive best when supported by clear structures of benefit and consequence. Loyalty without structure is fragile. It demands more than it returns. But loyalty embedded within well-designed systems, those are the kinds of bonds that last lifetimes. If we want to build real loyalty in our families, our organizations, our communities, we have to stop relying on sentiment alone. We have to start thinking like architects. What do people gain by staying? What do they lose by leaving? What common goals are we pursuing? What systems reinforce mutual investment? When we ask these questions, we're not undermining loyalty, we're strengthening it. We're making it real, durable, and resilient in the face of change. Because at the end of the day, loyalty is not a feeling, it's a function. And the best loyalty isn't built on idealism. It's built on interdependence, accountability, and the invisible but powerful ties that make staying not just a choice, but the best one. When Machiavelli wrote that it is safer to be feared than loved, he wasn't endorsing tyranny or cruelty. He wasn't saying leaders should be heartless or that relationships should be built on intimidation. What he was doing was cutting through sentimentality to expose a hard truth, that fear, when properly structured, creates more reliable behavior than love. His insight wasn't about instilling terror, it was about the power of consequence. In other words, people respond more consistently to what might happen to them than to how they feel about someone. This idea makes many people uncomfortable, especially in cultures that romanticize loyalty, love, and honor. But if we look honestly at human behavior in families, companies, politics, even friendships, Machiavelli's observation starts to feel less like cynicism and more like realism. People act in ways that align with their interests, and when love and loyalty ask too much without offering security or consequence, they often give way under pressure. Understanding fear in this context requires reframing it. Machiavelli wasn't suggesting that leaders should be violent or oppressive. He was talking about predictable deterrence, creating structures where betrayal or disloyalty comes with real consequences, and where loyalty is rewarded. This doesn't mean fear as terror, it means fear as accountability. In business, this principle shows up all the time. Employees stay loyal to companies not just because they love the mission, but because of what they stand to lose if they leave: bonuses, job security, health insurance, professional reputation. These are built-in consequences that create a rational incentive to stay committed. Similarly, employers retain their top performers not out of love, but because losing them could hurt the company's bottom line. Mutual interest backed by clear outcomes, sustains the relationship. It's not about blind trust, it's about structured reliance. Contrast that with relationships based purely on sentiment. If two people commit to each other with no shared accountability, no aligned goals, no consequences for neglect or harm, that bond becomes fragile. It may last during easy times, but when tested, it risks collapse. Love without structure is often short-lived. That's why many long-term relationships succeed, not just because of emotional connection, but because of the systems couples build together: shared finances, family responsibilities, housing, social networks. These are not romantic concepts, but they are realistic ones. They create consequences that reinforce commitment. In political leadership, Machiavelli's advice is even more evident. A ruler who depends solely on public affection is at the mercy of mood swings, misinformation, or populist tides. But a ruler who creates a system of governance where breaking the rules has consistent, enforceable penalties, and where loyalty is incentivized through stability and reward, builds more durable control. Again, it's not about abuse, it's about constructing institutions that make betrayal costlier than loyalty. This doesn't just apply to leaders. Parents use this model too. Children may love their parents, but they often behave better when they understand consequences. A child who respects boundaries because they know there will be fair. Consistent discipline is more likely to internalize values than one who is just told to behave because I love you. Love matters, but consequence teaches. What Machiavelli understood is that trust, when not supported by consequence, invites exploitation. People may say the right things, make the right promises, even believe them in the moment. But when the pressure mounts, when temptations arise, or when the benefit of betrayal becomes too appealing, words mean very little. Without a structure that holds people accountable, loyalty becomes optional. And when loyalty is optional in high-stakes environments, politics, war, business, even marriage, it tends to dissolve. So how do we use this insight to build true loyalty? We don't do it by demanding it. We do it by giving people good reasons to stay. We design relationships, institutions, and cultures where being loyal is the best, safest, and most beneficial option. This isn't manipulation, it's wisdom. People are more likely to be loyal when loyalty aligns with their self-interest, when it protects their goals, and when breaking it would cost more than keeping it. That might sound transactional, and in many ways, it is. But that doesn't make it empty. In fact, loyalty that emerges from honest alignment is often deeper and more resilient than loyalty based on vague ideals. When people stay because they choose to, because they understand the value of the relationship and respect the system that holds it, their loyalty is rooted in both mind and heart. Let's compare this concept through cultural lenses. In many Eastern societies, China, Vietnam, Japan, loyalty is heavily influenced by values like honor, filial piety, and social harmony. These values are often taught through proverbs, stories, and moral education. Loyalty is tied to a sense of duty, to the idea of chu tin, keeping one's word, being trustworthy. Betrayal is not just seen as a failure of action, but a shameful violation of personal virtue. This cultural view creates an internal pressure to remain loyal, but it also depends heavily on the individual's character and sense of shame. It's beautiful in theory, but fragile in systems where that sense of duty isn't universal. If the cultural glue weakens, say, through modernization or exposure to more individualistic norms, those loyalties begin to fray. And when that happens, there may be no structural fallback to hold people accountable. Contrast that with many Western models, particularly in the legal and economic spheres. In Western systems, trust is often codified in contracts. Whether it's a marriage, an employment agreement, or a corporate partnership, loyalty is formalized through terms and conditions. If one party breaks the agreement, there are legal, financial, or reputational consequences. This doesn't mean the West lacks personal loyalty, but it means the system doesn't depend on virtue alone. It acknowledges human imperfection and builds in safeguards. Of course, both systems have strengths and weaknesses. Eastern cultures may create stronger emotional bonds and a deeper sense of identity-based loyalty, but they can also lack protection when those bonds break. Western systems may protect individuals from betrayal through rules, but they can feel cold or impersonal when relationships become too contractual. The ideal, perhaps, lies in a blend where emotional connection is supported by structural reinforcement and where trust is earned and maintained, not simply expected. We see this dynamic in the modern workplace. Companies often talk about culture as a loyalty driver, but culture, when not backed by tangible structures, becomes fluff. Telling employees, "we're a family," means nothing if they're laid off during a minor downturn or if their needs are ignored. Real loyalty comes when employees know they are valued, when policies are consistent, and when rewards match contribution. If a company wants to retain its people, it must create a structure where being loyal makes sense not just morally, but practically. The same applies to leadership. A boss who is well-liked may have temporary influence, but a boss who earns respect through consistent behavior, sets clear boundaries, and enforces fair policies builds sustainable loyalty. Love may inspire, but structure sustains. This also holds true in romantic relationships. Many people assume love will naturally produce loyalty. But love, when not grounded in mutual respect, aligned goals, and shared responsibility, can lead to disappointment. Loyalty in relationships grows stronger when couples make explicit agreements, communicate expectations, and follow through on commitments. It's not about policing each other, it's about co-creating a system that protects the bond. Machiavelli's wisdom is dangerous not because it promotes fear, but because it reveals how vulnerable we are when we depend solely on goodwill. It strips away illusions. It says, if you want loyalty, don't hope for it, build for it. That may not sound romantic, but it's a formula that works. When we stop assuming that people will be loyal just because they care, and start asking what keeps loyalty intact, we shift from fantasy to strategy. And in doing so, we create environments where trust is real, durable, and grounded in reality. Ultimately, Machiavelli's insight doesn't destroy trust, it strengthens it. It asks us to move beyond blind faith and into conscious design, to see people not as potential betrayers, but as human beings responding to their context. To ask not, how can I make them stay, but what systems make staying the best option for both of us? Loyalty built this way isn't fragile. It's forged, it's tested, and it lasts. Because in the end, people don't stay because they swore an oath. They stay because staying makes sense emotionally, practically, structurally. Love may draw them in, but what makes them stay is knowing they belong to a system that rewards their loyalty and protects their interests. That is the loyalty Machiavelli understood. Not a dream, but a design. Living in a world where loyalty is conditional doesn't mean we have to give up on trust, love, or meaningful relationships. It means we need to get smarter about how we build those relationships. Trust doesn't have to be blind to be real. In fact, trust that's informed, grounded in observation, tested by time, and built on alignment is far stronger than any vow made in a heated moment or written into a promise no one knows how to keep. The challenge isn't avoiding betrayal entirely. It's learning how to create spaces where loyalty makes sense, where people want to stay because staying benefits everyone involved. The first step toward building wiser relationships is letting go of romanticized ideas about loyalty. Too often, we believe that loyalty is eternal, unshakable, and purely emotional. We look for dramatic proof declarations of love, solemn vows, grand gestures. But those things, while emotionally powerful, are not reliable indicators of someone's long-term intentions. What really matters is behavior over time. A friend who calls every week, shows up when you're sick, and follows through on their word is more loyal than the one who says, "I'll always be there for you," but disappears when you need them most. It's not the promise that proves loyalty, it's the pattern. Machiavelli would have understood this perfectly. In his world, filled with shifting alliances and dangerous politics, words meant very little without action. He observed that people act based on their interests, and those interests change. If you want to know where someone's loyalty lies, don't ask them, watch them. See how they behave when the situation no longer benefits them. Do they continue to show up when you're not useful to them anymore? Do they defend you when it might cost them something? Do they stay when it's easier to leave? This mindset can be unsettling, especially if we've been raised to believe in unconditional love and lifelong loyalty. But it's also liberating. It allows us to stop guessing and start observing. Instead of clinging to idealistic notions, we can evaluate our relationships with clarity. And when we do, we're not only protecting ourselves from future pain, we're also creating a healthier foundation for the relationships that actually matter. In business, this means building partnerships based on mutual value, not just trust. Two companies don't stay allied because they like each other. They stay allied because their goals are aligned. Their collaboration is profitable, and the systems they've built create mutual benefit. The same principle can apply to professional relationships. If you're working with someone and you want their loyalty, it's not enough to be likable. You have to be reliable, useful, fair. They have to see the benefit of continuing to work with you. And you need to recognize what they gain from the relationship. Trust, in this sense, becomes a currency. It must be earned and maintained. Friendship works similarly. Real friendship isn't about always agreeing or endlessly forgiving each other. It's about a shared understanding of what the relationship gives both people. Emotional support, companionship, shared history, these things create a bond, but that bond still requires effort. A friendship where one person is always giving and the other is always taking will eventually erode, no matter how close the two were in the past. That's why boundaries matter. Clear expectations, honest conversations, and consistent actions are what sustain friendships through time. You don't need to trust your friend blindly. You need to trust that they will behave in ways that align with the values you both share and that you'll do the same. Romantic relationships benefit even more from this approach. Too often, people jump into relationships believing that love alone is enough to guarantee loyalty. But love is not a static emotion. It changes, it deepens, it fades, it shifts. What keeps love alive is structure, shared goals, mutual respect, open communication, and accountability. If you want a partner to stay loyal, give them reasons to stay. Not threats or guilt trips, but clear incentives. Emotional security, appreciation, growth, shared vision. And expect the same in return. When both partners understand that loyalty is a decision they keep making, not a one-time promise, they become more intentional in their actions. They don't just stay together, they build something worth staying for. The hardest part of embracing conditional loyalty is accepting that it applies to us too. We like to think we're loyal people, but are we? Or have we just never faced the kind of pressure that tests our loyalty? This is a question worth asking, not to feel guilty, but to be honest with ourselves. Have we ever left a relationship because it no longer served us? Have we abandoned a friend when their life became difficult and inconvenient? Have we switched sides in an argument because the new side had more power, popularity, or comfort? It's easy to judge others for their disloyalty, but Machiavelli challenges us to examine our own incentives. Maybe the reason we haven't betrayed someone is not because we're more virtuous, but because the opportunity or temptation hasn't appeared yet. That doesn't make us bad, it makes us human. But recognizing this truth helps us build self-awareness. It helps us stay humble, and it helps us make loyalty a conscious choice rather than a passive label we apply to ourselves. When we understand that loyalty is conditional, we begin to see relationships as dynamic systems. Every interaction either strengthens or weakens the structure. Trust is built when expectations are met repeatedly over time. Respect grows when boundaries are honored. Love deepens when both people feel seen, supported, and secure. None of these things happen by accident. They happen through effort, through feedback, through adaptation. So how do we maintain hope in a world where everyone is capable of betrayal? By accepting that betrayal is not always a reflection of evil, it's often a reflection of misalignment. And when we focus on creating alignment of goals, of values, Of needs, we reduce the risk of betrayal without pretending we can eliminate it. We also build relationships that are more honest. When we talk openly about our needs, our limits, and our expectations, we invite the other person to do the same. This transparency creates trust that is grounded, not idealized. It says, I want to stay loyal to you, and I want to understand what that means in real terms. It says, let's build something that works for both of us, so neither of us feels tempted to walk away. In practice, this could mean negotiating the terms of a partnership up front, what each person wants, what they'll contribute, what the deal breakers are. It could mean checking in regularly in a friendship or relationship to see how both people are feeling, whether things still feel fair, whether adjustments need to be made. It could mean being willing to walk away when the alignment no longer exists, not out of spite, but out of respect for the other person's growth and your own. This mindset also helps us recover from betrayal more effectively. Instead of spiraling into self-blame or bitterness, we can ask better questions. What changed? What did I assume? What might I do differently next time? Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning. And sometimes, it means accepting that the relationship was built on a foundation that couldn't support long-term loyalty, and that now we have the opportunity to build something stronger. Living with this clarity is not about becoming cold or calculating. It's about becoming emotionally intelligent. It's about recognizing that loyalty is not a given, it's a result. And like any result, it can be engineered. It can be designed. Not perfectly, not always, but better than blind faith ever could. When we move from betrayal to clarity, we give ourselves a gift. We stop asking others to be perfect, and we start asking them to be honest. We stop waiting for loyalty to appear magically, and we start cultivating the conditions that make it possible. We let go of fantasies and build with facts. And we understand that real loyalty isn't about staying no matter what, it's about understanding exactly why you stay and making that choice every day. Because in the end, loyalty is not proven by how long someone stays. It's proven by how consciously they choose to remain. And that kind of loyalty, grounded in clarity and mutual purpose, is the kind that actually lasts. Coming to terms with the true nature of loyalty isn't the end of hope. It's the beginning of wisdom. For most of our lives, we're told loyalty is an unbreakable promise, a moral pillar, a virtue that defines good people. And so, we grow up expecting it to be absolute. We expect our friends to stand by us forever, our partners to remain no matter what changes, our colleagues to have our backs even when it costs them. But slowly, through experience and disappointment, we start to see a different picture. We begin to realize that loyalty isn't always what we thought it was. And for many, that realization feels like a kind of loss of innocence, of safety, maybe even of trust. But what if it's not a loss? What if it's a gift? Understanding that loyalty is conditional doesn't destroy its value. It transforms how we care for it. When we stop thinking of loyalty as something owed and start seeing it as something earned and nurtured, we build stronger, more intentional connections. We stop demanding blind allegiance and start fostering genuine alignment. We learn to appreciate the quiet, consistent acts of commitment rather than the grand declarations. And we begin to trust more wisely, not because we expect perfection, but because we finally see people clearly. There's something deeply liberating about no longer needing the illusion of permanent loyalty. It frees us from unrealistic expectations. It helps us forgive not only others, but also ourselves. Because when betrayal happens, we don't see it as a moral collapse, but often as a predictable shift in priorities, a reflection of change. We can still feel the pain, but we no longer feel naive. That clarity gives us strength. This emotional and philosophical maturity reshapes how we build our relationships. Rather than hoping someone will never leave, we ask, what would make this relationship worth staying in for both of us? Rather than clinging to people out of fear, we build partnerships based on shared values, goals, and consequences. It's not that love and trust disappear. In fact, they become more meaningful because they're chosen, not assumed. They're maintained through effort, not fantasy. Take long-lasting friendships. For example, the ones that endure aren't usually the loudest or the most dramatic. They're the ones where both people have made consistent choices to show up, to give space when needed, to support during hard times, and to communicate honestly. These friendships may shift in intensity over the years, but they survive because the conditions for loyalty are respected. There's no guilt for needing distance, and no illusion that loyalty means constant presence. Instead, there's a deep understanding. I will be here because I choose to be and because I know why I'm here. In business, this realization leads to better teams and healthier cultures. Instead of relying on slogans about family or demanding unreciprocated dedication, leaders who understand loyalty's conditional nature create environments where loyalty thrives because it's rewarded and protected. Employees stay because they're valued, because there's mutual benefit, and because they feel secure. When conditions change, good leaders don't shame people for leaving. They ask what could be improved. This kind of workplace doesn't pretend loyalty is eternal. It builds systems that make loyalty sustainable. Romantic relationships, too, become more honest. When we stop expecting our partner to stay out of duty or fear, we start asking what helps both people grow. We talk more openly. We design our lives together instead of assuming commitment will hold everything in place. If a relationship ends, it's no longer seen as failure. Sometimes, the conditions that made the relationship right simply no longer exist. That's not betrayal, it's life. And once we accept that, we can love more freely and more deeply. Because we're no longer loving out of desperation to make it last forever. We're loving with our eyes open. This insight also makes us more compassionate. When we see loyalty as a reflection of aligned interests and mutual support, we stop labeling people as good or bad based on whether they stay. We become more curious about their story. Why did they leave? What changed for them? Could I have done something differently? Or were our paths simply meant to diverge? This kind of thinking doesn't just heal broken relationships, it prevents future ones from being built on false assumptions. Even more importantly, it helps us become more loyal to ourselves. Because sometimes we stay in places where our loyalty is hurting us. We remain loyal to jobs that drain us, friendships that belittle us, relationships that no longer nurture us, not because we should, but because we confuse endurance with virtue. But loyalty, when truly understood, is not about self-abandonment. It's about consciously choosing where we give our time, energy, and care. Staying somewhere that harms us isn't noble, it's misaligned. And leaving, when done with clarity and respect, can be an act of loyalty to our growth. This brings us to the most powerful part of accepting loyalty's true nature. We become architects of our relationships, not just participants. We stop waiting for people to prove themselves and start creating the kind of environments where loyalty is likely to emerge and flourish. We become better friends, better partners, better leaders, not because we're demanding loyalty, but because we're making it worthwhile. We're giving people reasons to stay. And that's far more powerful than asking them not to leave. It also allows us to process betrayal differently. When someone lets us down, we no longer ask, "How could they do this to me?" Instead, we ask, what changed? What was missing? Was the loyalty real in the first place? Or did I see what I wanted to see? These questions don't erase the pain, but they keep us from getting stuck in it. They move us forward. They invite healing. The irony of it all is that the people most likely to betray us aren't always the cunning manipulators. Sometimes, they're the ones who believe most deeply in loyalty as an absolute. They make promises with the best intentions. They believe they'll never leave, never falter. And then life happens. They meet someone new, their values evolve, their situation changes, and suddenly, they're forced to reconcile their ideal with reality. Because they never considered loyalty as conditional. They have no tools to process the shift. And when they break away, they do it clumsily or guiltily or without warning. Not out of cruelty, but out of fear, confusion, or shame. This is why blind belief in eternal loyalty can be dangerous. It sets people up to betray or to feel betrayed because it denies the complex, evolving nature of human connection. In contrast, those who understand the fragility of loyalty often handle it with more care. They don't promise forever. They promise to show up. They communicate when things change. They negotiate when needs shift. And when they stay, it means something because it's not reflex. It's a conscious act. That's what makes it beautiful. The world doesn't need more O's of loyalty. It needs more understanding of what loyalty actually is. It needs more people who are willing to say, I choose you not because I have to, not because I promised, but because it still makes sense, and I want to. That kind of loyalty is alive. It breathes. It adapts. And when it ends with grace, not betrayal. So maybe the goal is not to live in a world where no one ever leaves us. Maybe the goal is to live in a world where people leave honestly, where they stay for the right reasons, and where we all have the tools to navigate those shifts without bitterness or despair. That kind of world isn't built on loyalty alone. It's built on truth. And the truth is this: you don't need a world full of loyalty. You need a world full of clarity. A world where people tell you why they're here and when they can no longer be. A world where you trust, not because someone swore they'd never leave, but because they keep choosing to stay. So ask yourself, have you ever expected someone to stay loyal, only to be disappointed? And when you look back, were you seeing them clearly or just seeing the version of them you wanted to believe in? What would your relationships look like if they were based on mutual understanding, not fantasy? What kind of loyalty could you build if you stopped demanding it and started designing for it? Maybe the deepest loyalty is not about staying forever. Maybe it's about staying with intention and leaving with integrity. Maybe it's not about being unbreakable, it's about being honest. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of loyalty worth believing in. If you made it this far, thank you. That already tells me something about you. You're not afraid of hard truths. You're not here for quick fixes or empty affirmations. You came to look behind the curtain, to question what you've been told about loyalty, trust, and betrayal. And I respect that deeply. We've just taken a long, winding journey together. We've unpacked loyalty's illusions, dissected betrayal's pain, and confronted the sobering idea that loyalty is not unconditional. But far from losing something, I hope you feel like you've gained clarity. Because understanding loyalty's limits doesn't make you colder, it makes you wiser, stronger, safer. You see now how real loyalty isn't about sticking around blindly. It's about making conscious, informed choices. It's not a vow whispered under starlight. It's a pattern built brick by brick, tested over time. It doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for intention. And here's the most powerful part. When you stop expecting loyalty to be eternal, you stop being broken when it ends. You start asking better questions. You begin building smarter systems. You become more loyal to people who deserve it, and maybe most importantly, more loyal to yourself. You stop giving your energy to places that drain you. You stop calling endurance a virtue when it's actually self-abandonment. You learn when to stay, and, just as importantly, when to let go. So let me ask you, have you ever expected someone to be loyal, only to realize you misunderstood who they were or what they needed? What did that experience teach you about yourself? About the kind of relationships you want to build from now on? Leave your reflections in the comments. This is more than a conversation, it's a community. And your story might be the one that helps someone else heal or see things more clearly. And remember this: the person most likely to betray you is not the Machiavellian manipulator. It's the idealist, the one who believed loyalty was forever until the world reminded them it's not. So don't place your faith in forever. Place it in understanding. Place it in consistency. Place it in truth. Because loyalty, when it is real, is not about never leaving. It's about knowing exactly why you stay. And that kind of loyalty, the kind that survives because it's constantly chosen, is the only kind worth building. If this video moved you, if it challenged you, healed something, or made you think differently, please take a second to like it. Share it with a friend who needs to hear this. Subscribe if you want more content that's not afraid to go deeper. And if you'd like to support my work, your super thanks donation helps me keep making meaningful videos like this one. Thank you for being here, for listening, for thinking critically and feeling deeply. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, don't just look for loyalty. Look for clarity. That's where the truth lives.